Welcome to the Obsolete Scrutiny. I'm your host, Johnny Powell. Kingsley's Adventure is a platformer game on the PlayStation 1, featuring a sword-wielding fox protagonist on a quest to become a true knight. It sounds like a recipe for a classic platform game, one that could go alongside Crash, Spyro and Croc for example, but is it that good? So let's see if this relatively rare PlayStation 1 game can stand up to scrutiny. Although I never owned Kingsley's Adventure when it came out in 1999, I owned a demo of the game that came with issue 52 of the official UK PlayStation magazine. I remember finding the demo fun and played it lots of times. However, I never remember seeing the game in the shops, so it wasn't until recent years that I bought the game in full off the internet. The game used to have an official website, which was quite fun and a bit of a blast from the past, but sadly it's been taken down recently. But luckily I was able to find some screen caps of the site, including one that seems to be an interview with game designer James Smith. So if we have a look at that, he talks about his previous game history. I wonder what he's worked on.
Some of the worst PC titles ever unleashed on the human race. It makes me tremble to even think about them, let alone name them.
Okay, well, I admire the guy's honesty, but this isn't filling me with confidence. However, he goes on to say that the inspirations for Kingsley's Adventure were Croc, Crash, Zelda, and a little bit of Tomb Raider. That sounds more like it, and I can say straight away that you can definitely see these influences in the game, with various game challenges, puzzles, and level styles. So let's dive into the game and start at the start menu. This must be the quickest platform game from putting the disc in and pressing start on your PlayStation to actually playing the game. Now, I would never complain about a game that starts quickly. The only problem is the theme tune for Kingsley's Adventure, which I think is the best piece of music in the game, is used on this screen here, and sadly the song's slow to get going, and therefore it's really easy just to skip through and miss it. And it's a shame because it's a really cool piece of music that gets you pumped for a medieval adventure game, and I think it should have been used in another level to give players a chance to enjoy it. Anyway, the story of the game is actually quite bizarre. An evil chef, in fact according to the instruction manual, not just a chef, but a self-taught chef, called Bad Custard. Come on, isn't that fantastic? Bad Custard. So this evil self-taught chef's food is so bad, it gives the king diarrhea, and I quote from the instruction manual, "There was a spate of food poisonings that left the king sitting on his throne for days on end." I mean, oh my god. But then, if you hire a chef called Bad Custard, what the hell do you expect? So, because of his awful cooking, Bad Custard is hounded from the castle, and in a fit of rage he steals a magic book and proceeds to cause mayhem throughout the Fruit Kingdom where the game takes place.
They definitely need a hero to save them now! Don't you think?
So the game itself starts off in Kingsley's room in Carrot's castle, where we speak to our aunt. And one of the first problems with this game becomes immediately apparent, and that's the voice acting, or rather, the lack of it. I have to say, for a moment this might come off as kind of cute, but after more than 10 seconds it's just quite frankly annoying. I'm guessing because the developers thought there was too much dialogue in the game, it wouldn't be possible to have that much voice acting, but that's a shame because the incoherent mumbles that they use instead become irritating after any length of time. And some good voice acting could have been a strength of the game instead of a weakness. If we have a look around, the graphics aren't quite as pleasing as in Crash or Spyro. At the same time, the general look of the game certainly isn't bad, and the level of detail in some places is actually really good. So we make our way down the stairs and oh my god, what is that? This is a badger called Old Wrinkle. What sort of name's that? Kingsley's rather like Spyro in his personality, and he's very gung-ho and wants to become a hero and save the day. But before we can do this, this badger old wrinkle tells us we must train to see if we're worthy of becoming a true knight, and so Kingsley goes through to the training rooms. So these early stages are very good to begin to master the game's controls, and unlike in Crash Bandicoot where you're instantly faced with pits and enemies that could actually kill you, in Kingsley we're taught to control the game in this room where you can't actually die, and that's a good thing because unlike Crash, the controls in Kingsley are really not that easy to pick up. They do take a lot of getting used to, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. So Kingsley's attack is twofold. Not only can he attack, he can also block enemies. And for PlayStation, I can't really think of any other platformers that tend to use a block as well as an attack. The risk of this is that it could slow down the gameplay, and at first the block and the attack feels quite awkward, but as you get used to it, it actually becomes second nature and doesn't slow the game down so much as it feels like we're actually fighting more like a swordsman actually would. And for me, the combat in this game is a big plus, and sets it apart from most other early 3D platformers on the PlayStation. On the other hand, the controls themselves are not that good. In fact, the controls are probably a big part of what stopped this game becoming much more successful. You'd think a Fox character would be agile, but sadly Kingsley handles in a way that feels extremely stiff and awkward. To be honest, it makes Croc's controls look like Spyro the Dragon. It's just not fluid, and it's very, very stiff. The biggest controls related issue is jumping. You'll be doing a lot of jumping in this game. And unfortunately, the game not only expects you to clear massive distances, it wants you to do it fast, within time limits, and with obstacles to avoid. Now, I don't mind difficulty in a game. Take Rayman 1 for an example. But in Rayman, when you die, you feel as if it's your fault because the controls are spot on and can't be blamed. And that encourages you to try it over and over and over again because you know that with practice you can get there. But in Kingsley's Adventure, when you die, it often feels as if it's down to poor controls, and that's something totally different. However, that being said, it is possible to adjust to the controls, and because of this the game is bearable. It does test your patience, and the controls really do take some getting used to. But once you do have the hang of it, you can play the game, and it does become quite fun. So Carrot Castle is like a warp room in Crash 2 and 3, with these foxholes going to different levels. The first new world we explore is Seatown, quite an atmospheric and good-looking maritime location. There certainly is a charm to this game that helps me overlook some of its flaws. Levels like Seatown capture it very well. The town itself feels open, vast and surreal, perfectly fitting the fantasy mood of the game. You can also explore the town's buildings, which is a nice touch and expands the world of the game, and you're rewarded with coins and quirky locations if you do. And the coins are like the Wumpa Fruit in Crash Bandicoot. Collect 100 and you'll get an extra life. As Kingsley speaks to the residents of the town, he learns an evil pirate, Captain Gallagher, has stolen someone called Briny Jim's galleon, meaning no one can trade with Seatown, and of course it's up to Kingsley to save the day. We find out that there's a secret tunnel in the pub that leads to Cutlass Isle where we can confront Captain Gallagher. And actually going through the tunnel from the warm and bright pub to a dark and crisp night on Cutlass Isle is where this game really begins to feel like an adventure. So far in the game there's been no major danger, and suddenly it feels very real, and moments like this are what gives Kingsley's Adventure its charm. It doesn't quite pull off the fantasy atmosphere of Spyro the Dragon, but you can tell Kingsley's Adventure is trying its best, and that in itself is something that's quite enjoyable. So in the atmosphere department, Kingsley's Adventure can be pretty good. However, in other parts of the game, the atmosphere is somewhat let down by some rather generic and sometimes just weird character designs. It's strange because Kingsley himself has a really good character design that's both striking and functional. He looks like he could be an iconic PlayStation character, and yet we have some just bizarre character designs in the world around him, which, coupled with the non-dialogue, feels very low quality actually compared with games like Spyro. On the other hand, we do have some enemies which I think suit the game. The swordfish in Seatown look very swish, and some of the enemies actually look quite scary, and I think there should be some scary baddies for this to be a proper adventure. In Kingsley's Adventure, each world generally consists of a main town where the inhabitants will inform you that there's a problem they're facing, and then several levels with plenty of platforming, challenges and puzzles before a final boss. The levels themselves are of decent length, and having the town before them builds them up quite nicely. There's definitely more of a focus on puzzles than in Crash or Croc, so I can see what the designer James Smith means when he says that Tomb Raider was an inspiration. I mentioned combat earlier in this review, and I think that's something that gets better and better as the game goes on. Unlike most of the enemies in Crash, Spyro and Croc, the enemies in Kingsley can take multiple hits to defeat, generally more and more as the game goes on. This creates a difficulty curve that's gradual, but not so gradual that it's too easy, and it's really fun taking down big foes when you've mastered the fighting style. Kingsley is a really good protagonist for this game, and like in Spyro, it's fun to be able to take down enemies much larger and more frightening than you are. Unfortunately though, the difficulty curve of the platforming itself is all over the place. In some later levels it really isn't too bad, but some earlier parts of the game are ridiculously hard. One example that sticks out to me is in the second world, Porluck Village, in a stage that involves jumping across these slippery platforms. Because the platforms are slippery and you've built up momentum from the previous jump, there's no way of stopping for a break between jumps, so the whole run needs to be lined up perfectly, and each jump must be timed just right in order to make it. It's just too difficult with the stiff controls. Luckily you don't die if you fall, but this is just frustrating because you have to be spot on from the start in order to make these jumps, and that involves painstakingly lining Kingsley up sometimes just to make it. And with good controls you'd just be able to jump and correct yourself as you go like you do in many Crash Bandicoot levels, but here that's not an option. Eventually you'll get the hang of it, and when you do it is satisfying. But it's a shame that jumping isn't anywhere near as fluid as it is in other older platformer games. Then there's some jump stages like this one in the first world which are quite frankly too hard for an early stage, with cannon fire making it even worse. The difficulty curve for platforming in Kingsley's Adventure is a mess and does take some getting used to. The other big problem with Kingsley's Adventure is that there are too many parts of levels that look the same, and coupled with a very bad example of distance fog, it's incredibly easy to get lost in levels. And the distance fog is surprisingly bad, especially when you've been spoiled by games like Spyro the Dragon, which found ways to eliminate distance fog. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if you could see a little further, but it becomes really evident that there's a problem in big rooms like the throne room, and because the levels look so similar all over, you'll find yourself getting lost in what effectively becomes a maze. I found myself consciously trying to memorise the layout of levels in order to avoid getting lost, and that's something that I just don't do in other platformer games. The boss fights in Kingsley's Adventure are fun, albeit not particularly challenging or unique. Each boss battle generally consists of the boss firing something at you and then charging at you, but for what they are, I enjoyed them. At the end of each world, Kingsley will receive a True Knight item, and these can come in useful in the next world you enter. The crossbow is particularly fun, adding more challenge and variety to the gameplay. You can switch between weapons by pressing select. This is a useful feature and it's quite fun when you need to switch between, for example, the crossbow and the sword quickly. It's fluid and smooth. And there's also some really good music in the game. Some tracks are definitely stronger than others, but in the caves of Porluck Village, for example, it's sublime. And overall the music always fits the mood. It's definitely an above average soundtrack. So the combat, the puzzles, and the parts of the platforming that aren't ridiculously hard, and also the atmosphere in some of the stages, are definitely the strong parts of Kingsley's Adventure. If it sounds like I've complained a lot about this game, it's because it's frustrating that the flaws in this game seem to hold back what should be otherwise a really successful and well-known PlayStation game. This game should have been one that is up there with Crash Bandicoot, Croc and Spyro, but unfortunately it just never happened. So in conclusion, Kingsley's Adventure is a rare platformer that's worth a try. The gameplay itself is definitely flawed, but not so much that it isn't fun. Just be prepared to be annoyed at times with difficult platforming and awkward controls. If you can deal with that, it's definitely a game that's worth playing. And no matter how much it does test your patience, it's one of those games that after you rage quit, and I know I did a few times playing this, you'll want to come back to it. As annoying as a tough platforming can be, it's addictive. The atmosphere is good, the game feels like an adventure, and I would say with the combat style it's quite different to Crash, Spyro and Croc. If you like those games but fancy something a little bit different, I think Kingsley's Adventure is definitely one to go for. This is a game that, like Silent Bomber, needs to be on PlayStation Network. So to sum up, if you see Kingsley's Adventure going for a decent price, I would definitely add it to your collection. I know it's far-fetched, but if there was a remastered version like the Insane series for Crash Bandicoot that's coming up, with better graphics, fixed controls and extra levels, I think it could be the success that it really should have been back in 1999. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. There should be some more Obsolete Scrutinies coming up, and I'm hoping to post another video with my thoughts on the newly released footage from Crash Bandicoot Insane. But for now, take care. This is Johnny Powell, signing out.